Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election, specifically some early polling. I want to take a few minutes today just to address some early polling, numbers, and just briefly talk about why I think you shouldn't put too much stock into the preliminary polls that we are getting. But at the same time, I do want to talk about Donald Trump's chances of winning the presidential election, why I think they're still higher than you might think. Even though I am going to talk about the polls first. So we're just going to get right into it here. And before we really look at the specific polls for this cycle, I want to talk about why I generally, just kind of as a ground rule for myself, don't really like to look at early polling. In previous cycles, it really has not been the best indicator. The economy, the approval rating of the president, the general vibe of the country, which party is more favored, those things are usually better early on. We're 14 months away. So at this point, I think those things are all, I'd rather use those to predict the election than polls with 10 to 15% undecided. And I would also like to remind you, that early polling in the past has historically not been very indicative, I don't know why I said indicative, but early polling is usually not the best way to predict these things, because if you look at previous elections, it hasn't really resembled anything close to the ultimate result. In 2020, if you go back to polls from fall and even summer 2019, they were really good for Joe Biden against Donald Trump. He was up double digits in some polls, and he was defeating him in all the swing states. And they were terrible for other Democrats, whether it be Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and they really didn't have a consistent thing. What you'll notice is that in cycles where polls are good, where they actually are useful, which was not 2022 and not 2020. Maybe the last example of that would be 2018, or maybe before that 2012, if we're talking about a presidential year. They all show a similar thing. They're all within a couple points of each other, and they all, can reasonably show a range of outcomes that are, possible, right? They're not showing a Democratic landslide one day, then the next day they're showing a Republican victory. They're showing, relatively close results, and they all line up to be the same environment. In 2020 and 2019, we didn't get that. And ultimately, the polls were very off in November 2020. If you go to 2016 in the early polls there, Hillary Clinton was destroying Donald Trump. She was up by double digits nationwide. She was winning almost every swing state in the, November, December, October 2015 polls. And she maintained that lead. It did shrink as we, approached election day 2016, but she maintained that lead, and the polls were obviously very wrong in 2016 as well. And even in 2012, it's kind of a different story. The polls ended up being pretty close. They did overestimate Mitt Romney by a little bit, but they were decent in 2012. But if you go back to 2011 polls, they showed Romney beating Obama pretty consistently. It wasn't by big margins, but they, showed Obama really in a lot of trouble. And his position in 2011 is actually pretty similar to the position that Joe Biden is in right now, at least if you look solely at the polls. Biden right now is, maybe slightly ahead of, tied with, or slightly behind his likely GOP opponent. And that's where we kind of talk about 2024. So, they haven't done an average yet, but the latest polls, Biden's tied with Trump from Fabrizio Lee, which is a GOP poll. Again, it's the same poll. They just pushed undecided. So Trump's up by one without leaners, and then when you push, by push undecided, they mean, can you, if they call someone and he's like, I don't really know, I'm not sure who I'd vote for, they'll push you and they'll say you had to make a choice right now, who would you vote for? And obviously that'll add margins to both candidates. Trump goes from 40 to 46. Biden goes from 39 to 46. So they're essentially even in this poll. Biden's down by one in this YouGov poll. He's up by one in this Morning Consult poll. I'm ignoring DeSantis polls, by the way. He's tied, although it looks like slightly down a little bit in this Big Village poll. And he's down by 4, and they don't push the undecideds. And then over here, I've never heard of this core strategy, so I'm not really going to look at, that's Illinois. I should be doing national. What am I thinking? But, I don't know why Biden was up 20 nationally. That's funny. But, over here, he's tied with Trump. He's down by 5 to Trump in this Emerson poll. He's down by 2 when they push through undecideds, it looks like, and he's up by 1 in this Harris poll. So he's either down a little bit or up a little bit. Maybe he's even. Our latest poll has him even. So the polls are not good for Biden right now, and they're especially bad when you remember that in 2020, the polls universally overestimated him. He was expected to win by, I think, 7% nationally in the polls. He won by 4.5%. And so, again, Looking at a polling miss from the previous election isn't the best way to predict the next election in 2022. If you took the 2020 polling miss and all those swing Senate races, you would have had Dr. Oz up by 7. Blake Masters would have been winning. Herschel Walker would have been up by 3. Catherine Cortez Masto would have been, in a likely Republican race. And so, again, polls generally tend to overcorrect, and this is a big theory I have about American politics. And it's influenced by international politics too. If you go to Britain or you go to Canada, one cycle the polls will overestimate the Liberal Party or the Labour Party. The next cycle they'll overestimate the Conservatives or the Tories or whatever you want to call them. And so in America, that didn't happen between 2016 and 2020. They missed twice in a row. And then in 2022, they really were like, we have to get it right this time. They created super Republican samples, and what I mean by that, just to kind of get a bit more in depth, they would create, right, like when you do a poll, you have to have a sample that is reflective of the state you're polling or of the country as a whole. So you want to have, a representative amount of white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, in a state like South Dakota or in Montana, where Native voters are a big chunk of the electorate. That's also often considered pretty heavily. You want to have educated voters, uneducated voters. You want to have men. You want to have women. You want to have different age groups. And so you have to create a sample that is very representative of the electorate as a whole. So in 2022, they did that, but they made the samples slightly more Republican. Maybe they'd have a higher white percentage than the actual electorate. Maybe they'd sample more men. Maybe they'd sample more boomers. And so that made their polls, they would ask them what they wouldn't rig them, but they would ask them, who are you going to vote for? And they would get more GOP skewing results because their samples were more GOP skewing. And so on election day, Democrats did a lot better than the polls were expecting. They were wrong 3 times in a row. They were wrong in 2016. They were wrong in 2020. And because of that, they got it wrong in 2022 yet again. So because they overcorrected so far, they swung the pendulum. It was on the left. They tilted it. I'm not showing my hands right now, but if you imagine kind of a semicircle where you have a ticker that is way on the left for 2016 and 2020, instead of tilting it back to the center, they tilted it all the way to the right for 2022. That's what happened. That is why in 2022, despite being down in the polls, Raphael Warnock won, John Fetterman won, Catherine Cortez Masto won, Tony Evers won, Laura Kelly won, Katie Hobbs won. And so in 2024, we don't really have an idea because, again, if you use the logic that a lot of Republicans are using last year, you'd say, well, hold on. Well, since the polls overestimated Democrats by 5% here in 2020, or since they overestimated Republicans by 5% here in 2022, what if we just add 5% to the Democrats every time? You'd be getting a Biden victory. But if you look at the last presidential election, which is 2020, you're adding more points, you'd be getting a Trump victory. So you can do, a lot of, weighting. You can use different metrics to predict the results, but it doesn't change the fact that polls are still really, really useless at this point in time. And they're just not, really worth anything when you're looking at the electorate as a whole. Especially, you go to this poll, they're tied 46-46. That means 8% of the electorate in this poll did not make up their mind. Maybe they're saying, I'll vote third party. Maybe they're saying, I don't know yet. I genuinely have no idea. And so that's why a poll like this is not really telling us anything. I am confident that Biden will get 46. I will guarantee you Biden gets 46% of the vote in 2024. Trump, I'd say 90% chance he gets 46, maybe 80% chance. I guess in a scenario in which he actually goes to jail before the election and his campaign crashes, maybe he gets 44% in an absolute worst, and Biden gets like 53%, then a third party gets 3%. But Trump getting 46, I think he's going to get around that. I think Biden's going to get more than that, popular vote-wise. And so just because these two candidates are 46 doesn't really tell me anything. All that says is, look, the people who are going to vote for these candidates have already told polls that it's the remaining 8% they're going to make or break the election results for either candidate. So that's why polls this one I don't really love. Now, just kind of segue into my next, or this second part of the video, just to talk about why I do think Donald Trump might have a better chance of winning than you think. It's important to remember that I'm not going to use polls to back up my argument here. I really don't think that they tell us anything, like I've been saying. But I do want to just talk about fundamentals. So fundamentals, it's like the economy, the approval rating of the incumbent president, just kind of the vibe of the country. It's kind of like a 13 keys-based analysis. We're not going to do that right now. I will do that before the election, though. And by the way, I got a comment from Al Lichtman on that video. He was kind enough to comment on that, so I pinned it. That's pretty cool. Pretty happy to see that. But to get back on topic here, I think Biden's a pretty beatable incumbent. Like, just if we look at this in a more simplistic, holistic manner, he is unpopular. He has like a 41% approval rating. Here we go. We can pull it up right now. I bet he has a 41%. Yeah, he's just below 41%, which is not where you want to be. I think that goes up a little bit before Election Day just because voters can be negatively polarized into liking him when they compare him to Donald Trump. But he has a negative approval rating. It's going to stay that way. He is old. He's a very, very bad debater. I think especially at this point, I think he's not charismatic either. And I think that the economy is going to be a problem for him. Most voters, perceive him to be weak on the economy in every single poll. I don't think we can find a single poll that is under 2.25 years old, or Biden will be above water in terms of handling of the economy. I really doubt you can find even anything close. I doubt he even cracks 45 in any of them. So voters really don't like the way he's handling the economy for whatever reason. Whether that's legitimate or not, they don't like it. But that's going to be a problem for him, especially because the economy is always among the most important issues. In fact, in 2024, I think it will be the most important issue. And so Donald Trump, I think, is a flawed candidate. I think, obviously, his legal trouble has really hurt him. I think the fact that he'll be, let's be real, there's a chance he's in prison because he has multiple trials before Election Day, coming as soon as March. So he will definitely be in a sticky situation come November, regardless of whether he's favored to win or not. So he's by no means the ideal candidate. I think Republicans would still be better off running someone else, but obviously he's the favorite to win the nomination, so we're just going to be talking about him as the likely opponent. And so that kind of brings us to a point where we're in a both sides bad situation. I think Biden is unpopular. He's disliked. His base is not motivated at all. But Trump is, he's been indicted 91 times. He could be, he'll be in a courthouse for a lot of 2024. He might even be in jail, which is crazy to think about, but it's an outcome that could happen. And so that kind of sets the scene for a third party to come in and, absorb a certain amount of the vote, and that really would have an impact on the swing states. And so obviously there's no way a third party candidate could win the election in 2024. We all know that. No matter how strong the candidate, no matter how good the campaign, Biden or Trump will be the next president, or whoever the GOP nominee is. Now, what could happen is we could maybe see Trump sticks at 46, and again, the 46 figure is important because maybe that's his core base, people who will vote for him no matter what. Let's say Biden's at 46 as well. What if the 8%, instead of breaking for a candidate, what if that chunk of the electorate votes for a no-labels candidate or a green candidate or a libertarian candidate, and Trump wins the election? So, this isn't to say that I think Trump's going to win. I think he's still an underdog. But if you look at this narrative that could happen between Biden being unpopular, between, the economy really being a problem for the current administration, and between third parties, I think there's a real path to victory for Donald Trump here. Now, I, again, don't invoke the polls just yet, but they do reflect this kind of narrative. So I just kind of wanted to briefly talk about that. It wasn't a super organized or structured video. I know I didn't fill out a map or anything, but I do want to say that I do think that there are a lot of signs of a close election. I think that that's where I'm at right now. So thank you so much for watching. Again, if you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.